thank you all for coming. My name is Jordan Dyrdahl-Roberts. I used to work for the Montana Department of Labor and Industry, but when I was asked to help process some subpoenas for ICE, I knew I had to resign. When news of my resignation spread, I knew not everyone was going to agree with what I did or why I did it, but I was a little disturbed by the number of disagreements that were based on inaccurate information about our immigration system. I was asked questions like, why would I put my family's future at risk for a bunch of people who couldn't bother to just get legal, when that just kind of encompasses this really expensive, very complicated system that can frustrate even experts? So, and I heard a lot of people talking about immigration, and the way they tend to talk about it doesn't match the complexity. It tends to be like, they think it's sort of like a line at a deli counter. You go up, you take your number, you wait patiently enough, and then you get your turn. It's actually kind of easy to see why people might think that. When you look at you look at how it's discussed on the news, nationally, something that's as complex as our immigration system doesn't fit well into these 10-second sound bites. And I was hoping to try and fix some of that. Because we can't fix a problem we don't understand, and compassion can't take root in ignorance. So that's why I've invited Mayor Wilmot Collins and Immigration Attorney Shahid Haq here with all of you tonight. And what I'm hoping is that coming away from this event, people have a bit more nuanced, comprehensive understanding of immigration. So how I'd like to start is I'd like Mayor Collins here to talk a bit about his experience coming to America as a refugee, and then have Shahid talk a bit more about some of the other parts of immigration law, and then we would open up the floor to some questions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Jordan is right. We have our own misconceptions about what the U.S. immigration process is like. But and every time, and everything falls on refugees. Everybody, when everything goes wrong, they put it on the refugee. There are several different ways people can enter this country. You can enter this country as a student. Coming as a student, you have to prove that you'll be able to pay those fees. You will prove that you'll be able to support yourself while you're here. You can come as a visitor. You also have to prove to the immigration authorities that, hey, I am going to A, B, C, and D. I'm going to this person who's invited me, and this is how I'm going to pay for my visit while I'm in America. You can come eventually you can become an asylum seeker. That visitor that came into the country might later on decide to seek asylum because going back home would threaten his life. And of course you can come as a refugee. But there's so many other ways you can come as a special envoy. You can come as one of those titles where hard to fill jobs. I'm sure Shahid knows all the different terminology. But I came as a refugee, and that process was intense, it was detailed, and it was grueling. And when people think that, as a matter of fact, coming here as a refugee is more strenuous than any other process. Going through the refugee process, no other immigrant will be screened as the refugee. No other. Because a refugee is one who flees his or her country and goes into a secondary country because of war, natural disaster, whatever it is. And when they go into that secondary country, usually they meet with the United Nations. The United Nations High Commission for Refugee will screen them. And after the UN screen that individual or individuals and they're deemed credible, then they will give them that status as a refugee. But only after you've gone through the UN screening. And then after that screening, depending on which country you will be eligible to go to, you have to go through that country's screening process. And of course, I wanted to come to America because my wife was already here with my child. And so there was nowhere else I wanted to go. So I had to go through the US screening process. And don't let anybody fool you. That process is the most detailed and intense process in the world. That's what we call extreme vetting. When someone asks you, what's extreme vetting? Say the US refugee process. That's what you need to say. Because you will go through the UN interview, and then the UN will grant you the status as a refugee. Then the UN will refer you to the US for resettlement. But before you get into that resettlement, you have to go through your interview with the State Department contractors. They will do a background check on you. And most people will say, how can they do a background check on you? Mind you, it's you who are trying to seek entrance into the US have to prove yourself to the authorities. They don't have to do anything. You have to prove that you're worthy and you're eligible to come into the country. And if there are any doubts, any whatsoever, you have to erase that doubt. So after they go through the background check, and please, most times when you're in the secondary country, most people say, but how will they go through a background check in the secondary country? No, they're going through a background check where you're from. And most people say, but if it's at war, how do you do that? Believe me, when the US is in your country, they're in your country. And then they'll go through a higher level background check for some people who they're skeptical about. And then they will run the refugee name through a series of different avenues. Law enforcement, intelligence database, terrorist or criminal history. They will go through high level clearance. Then they will do your fingerprints. They will take your picture. And all of this thing is not in a day. We're talking about maybe one process a month or more. That's how detailed they go. And then they will talk about your second set of fingerprints. And after your second set of fingerprints, they will send you to the FBI. The FBI will do what they need to do. When the FBI is done with you, for me, when I got to the 5th stage, I gave up. Because it was just so invasive and intense. I called my wife, I said, well, I can't do this anymore. This is way too invasive, this is way crazy. And especially being in another country where you're already struggling, and they're adding on to that struggle. And my wife just tried to reassure me, say, hey, and that's why I'm thankful for her, because had she not reassured me, I won't be mayor today. So, but, she said, they know what they're doing. They're doing the right thing, and you will come. You will join us. And after that, they will have more additional reviews. Then they will send you to the immigration. Immigration will interview you. Immigration will screen you. Then they will have an in-person interview with Homeland Security. You talk to Homeland Security. They will evaluate you. And they will tell you, yeah, no. And every step you have to be approved before you can take the next step. Like I remember one step, it took me almost 3 months to go through because they had to send back to Liberia to find out what I was doing in one part of the country at that time. when that part of the country was supposed to be dangerous, well, what was I doing there? And it took several months for them to clear that. And then Homeland Security, after they approve you, then you go to medical. And when I say they will screen you, believe me, there's no stone unturned in your body that they don't know about. They will screen you for contagious diseases, for this, for that, for everything. And then after medical, if you pass medical, then they will send you to cultural orientation. They will tell you about the place you're going in America. And that means you're almost home free. But after that, then they would pair you. There are 9 U.S. agencies in this country that resettle refugees. 9. And those 9 are Church World Service, Ethiopian Community Development Council, Episcopal Migration, Hebrew Immigrant and Aid Society, International Rescue Committee, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, United States Conference of Catholic Bishop, Migration and Refugee Services, and World Relief. Those are the only 9 agencies the State Department will refer refugees to for them to resettle. And for me, I came through the Church World Service. So you will go through their screening process, they will screen you, and then, but for me, I already knew where I want to go. And some people already know where they want to go because they have families in those places. And so it makes it a little easier. Because, say for instance, if I was a Muslim and I wanted to come to Helena, Montana, and I practice in the mosque, pray tell me, where am I going to practice my faith? Not in Helena. So they try to pair you as close to what you're used to as possible. But I was already determined the only place I wanted to go was to be with my family, who were already here in Helena. So it was easy. They sent me through. But we didn't have an agency in Montana. So I worked with the agency in Boise, Idaho. And eventually I arrived. But what bothers me the most is every negative is blamed to the refugee. And if you look at it, refugees are involved in less than 0.000 point something of the crimes that exist in this country. But every immigrant that is involved in something, they link, I don't know how to do it, but they know how to link it to refugees, which is so wrong. Because if you look at the stats, you'll find out that when refugees enter this country, they enter this country legally. All the screening processes, they're done outside of the U.S. When the U.S. approves you to come to this country, they've done their due diligence. They've done their homework. They've done their extreme vetting. And so when you come in as a refugee, you are entitled to everything except vote. And then you become a permanent resident, you're entitled to everything except vote. And then when you decide to become a citizen, you go through filling out the paperwork, and it's like, I think, maybe 20 pages of your life on paper. And then you go through the interview process. Then you go through the the testing process. And then if you pass, then they tell you you're swearing and all of that. But becoming an American is not an easy thing. And people out there always say, oh, they're just allowing people in the country, and they're just, no, they're not just allowing people in the country. People are going through the process we have in this country, and that process is intense. I'll stop here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for coming. Hopefully you can hear me okay. My name is Shahid Hawk, and I'm an immigration attorney here in Helena, and I've been practicing immigration law for about probably like 12 years now, and I've been living in Helena for about 10 years. So in the course of my time here in Helena, I've come to represent well over 1,000 immigrants throughout the state of Montana. Not most of the people I represent are not in Helena, but they're scattered around in every city in Montana that you can think of. So even though Montana has some of the fewest numbers of immigrants in the whole country, we still do have some immigrants, and I have clients in every small town you can think of, like all throughout the state, and they're all brought here for different reasons and different opportunities and different things that drew them to different parts of Montana. But it's been a pleasure to get to know a little bit more about what brings people to Montana and what they enjoy about Montana and what family connections they have here, because immigrants are part of our community. They live here in this state and they contribute to our state in so many different ways that people probably don't think about on a day-to-day basis. But so that's been a pleasure, and there's so much to talk about on the issue of immigration right now. It's in the news every day, and so I was thinking I would just talk about some of the topics on the top of my mind these days as an immigration attorney. One thing is I wanted to talk a little bit more about what Jordan was saying and why he quit his job at the Department of Labor. So ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They are the enforcement branch of the Department of Homeland Security. And this branch is what they often do is they apprehend people who they think are in the country illegally through investigation tips. As we saw from a video from last weekend, oftentimes it's just as simple as somebody speaking Spanish and getting the attention of an officer, and then the officer just starts questioning about their immigration status. So it could be any number of things, but ICE apprehends people and puts them into deportation proceedings. Another thing they do is they like to audit businesses and check to see if businesses are completing their I-9 forms properly. And so I-9s are the documents you fill out when you start a new job. And those I-9s can be audited by immigration to make sure that you're properly filling them out and verifying a worker's work authorization. Now, ICE is allowed to audit those, and they can go through that process to audit a restaurant, but they have to give 3 days notice, and the restaurant has to prepare the I-9s, and they have to go through a full audit process. But what ICE sometimes likes to do is just kind of jump the gun a little bit. What they're looking to do is actually try to apprehend people that they think are here without status, and they don't necessarily want to do the audit. So in that case, what they were doing is going to the Department of Labor, and they were issuing subpoenas to the Department of Labor to get quarterly wage reports from different businesses. And those quarterly wage reports have the names, social security numbers, and amounts of pay that were paid in that quarter for all the employees. So what ICE was able to do there is just make an end run around the normal process for how they are supposed to go about auditing a business and just get right at the records of the names of people. And what they did in a case that I was involved in 2005, and this was shown in the evidence, is that they ran those social security numbers and tried to find mismatches. And in some cases they were totally wrong because they mistransposed the numbers themselves or whatever, but they came up with a list of people that they thought didn't have valid social security numbers, and then they went and raided a whole bunch of restaurants in Montana. And some of you guys may have heard about that, it was in the news. But the raids were ultimately unfounded in most respects. They claimed there were drugs involved and everything else. There were never any drugs found. But all that happened was it was basically a raid on the restaurants, and they arrested some undocumented workers, and that was only made possible by the fact that the Department of Labor gave that information out freely. And so we thought that they had kind of stopped that practice, but it turned out, as Jordan saw, that there were more subpoenas being issued, and he's talked about this a whole lot, but he quit out of objection because that information was going to be used for raids to arrest undocumented workers. And so that's one thing that is going on, and if you have a concern about that, you could always contact Governor Bullock and voice that you care about that issue and you don't want the Department of Labor to give out that information. So other than that, you know, in our political sphere right now, immigration is a hot topic. There's a lot going on in terms of a change of direction in immigration enforcement under President Trump. And we first saw that, I mean, this was something that he talked about in his campaign quite a bit, and so we knew this was something that was going to be a priority. But we, in recent months, have seen a real ramp up in ICE enforcement activities, and ICE officers were really roving around in the Gallatin Valley area, in Bozeman, Big Sky, and West Yellowstone, and arresting a whole lot of people based on some kind of created list of people they suspected to be undocumented at disparate locations all throughout different cities. And so it was a whole operation. They were working early in the morning to late at night. I got calls from people who were afraid to come outside because there had been so many people arrested that anytime they saw a vehicle that was just idling in front of their house, they assumed it might be ICE. And because these vehicles they were using were unmarked, and so any truck could be ICE. And they showed up at homes. In one case, they were looking for the mother of a newborn baby. And when ICE knocked on the door, they said, "Are you the new mother?" So they were somehow aware of the fact that she was a new mother, and that led them to this person. In other cases, it seems like they got the information from the subpoenas that Jordan quit in protest to not supply, because it seems like some of those arrests were based on that data because they came from employers who were subpoenaed for that data. So in the end, it was a pretty devastating event for the community. There were 7 people placed into deportation, but there were many more than that who were arrested and questioned for no reason other than that they were of Latino ethnicity. So there were people who got pulled over just so ICE could ask if they knew a different person. And if anybody here has ever heard of the Fourth Amendment, you know, I don't think any of us have ever been pulled over to ask if we know where someone else is. You know, there's got to be probable cause for that stop. There's got to be probable cause to believe that you've committed a crime, or you know, you can't just be pulling people over. That's not how it works, but it does when ICE is kind of acting outside of their authority and running a little rampant. So ultimately, some of the people that were placed into deportation got released on bond, and some of them didn't. They got shuffled to Tacoma, Washington. But that's just one thing what happened very recently in the state of Montana, and it was something that I was working on a fair bit. So, you know, in Montana we have Border Patrol operating along the northern part of the border, and recently the Havre Border Patrol got in the news because they were filmed. They were questioning somebody about their immigration status who turned out to be a U.S. citizen, but they got on cell phone footage that they were asking the officer why they were being questioned. He said, "Well, you were speaking Spanish. That's not heard a lot up here." So, you know, I wasn't surprised when I heard that. I didn't even watch the video right away because I was like, "Yep, I'm sure they did say that," based on my own personal experience with the Havre Border Patrol. And over the years, I've seen that they are very aggressive over there. They're not operating strictly within the limits of the law and the Fourth Amendment. I had a client who had valid DACA status, which is a temporary status given by Obama in 2012, and her husband had a valid visitor's visa, and they were held, and she was held for 24 hours overnight, just because Border Patrol was engaging in this total speculation that they were smugglers. And that, of course, makes no real sense. I mean, they wouldn't be smuggling. I mean, if they're of Latino ethnicity and they're Mexican, and You know for a fact they didn't just come over the Canadian border. It doesn't make any sense to be saying they could be engaged in smuggling, but that was the allegation. They kept them for 24 hours for no reason. And in the course of the detention, they also implied that the pregnant person with DACA, I don't know if I mentioned she was pregnant, they mentioned that she might have to abort her baby in the detention facility. So it was pretty traumatic for them, and that was the kind of conduct that I've heard of from the Havre Border Patrol. So, it's a tough time for a lot of people right now because there's there are a lot of institutional practices that we got used to, that everybody got used to, that were humane practices that kept things going smoothly and kept things operating with some semblance of fairness. For instance, at the USCIS office, where they process applications for green cards and they process applications for citizenship, there used to be this sense that it was a generally fair process. The adjudicators were being generally fair, and that there was no effort made to deliberately deny applications, that it was a fair process. But now there's most certainly been a shift in the local office, and I've heard the same from immigration attorneys across the country, that suddenly seems to be a directive to actually try and deny more applications, and that seems to be what's happening, and it's a very sudden shift. And so it appears that even local offices are shifting in a different direction. And of course, all those things are not things we see. There's no written memo saying to deny more cases, but these are the things immigration attorneys are seeing all throughout the country, and it's not just make believe. That's really what's happening. So I guess I'll just leave it at that for now, and I'm sure Jordan has some more stuff.
Thank you. So basically what I wanted to do is, I'm pretty sure there are probably some questions people may have, want some clarification on, and I was just hoping to sort of open the floor. If anybody had something they wanted to say, maybe get, if you want a point clarified or had some issue you wanted to see if there was a resolution to. So, anybody have a question?
The attorney, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, said that the immigration level is very low in Montana. Did I understand that? Is that proportionate to the other states? We have fewer immigrants here proportionately?
Exactly, yeah.
Is that because organizations like Church World Services are looking at Montana, which a lot of Montana is very conservative, and saying these people would just have too hard a time here?
No,
They're sending them places where it's...
We have the lowest numbers of any non-citizens, whether they're refugees or visitors or family members or whatever, like any foreign-born people, or also any non-citizens, that we have one of the lowest numbers compared to other states.
Do you have a thought of why that's so?
I think most people want to be where they're familiar with, or, to each. If I find out that most people want to be where they have people like them.
Right.
All right. Like if you look at Minneapolis, they have a huge Ethiopian population. Most Ethiopians will want to go down there. If you go to Rhode Island, some people call it Little Liberia. That's where all the Liberians are. They converge there. And so I think I think that's the major reason.
Because say 2 or 3 generations ago, Montana was immigration central.
Yeah. Because International Rescue Committee had an office in Missoula, and they brought in the monks and all of that. Yeah, so they had an office, but in fact the office closed 2002, 2003, and it just reopened lately with Soft Landing.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to see what is the process like if it's a tourist that came here up in Glacier, gets arrested, where do they go and how does that go until, because I had an experience with somebody, but I don't know what what really happened or anything. But they said he went to Shelby and then was held there for a while and then came down to Helena, was held, and then they released him here. and then all his luggage went back to Minneapolis or something like that. And then he had to find a way back to where he was going.
Yeah, the process, if you're a visitor and you get arrested for something, then after you're convicted, ICE would be notified through a system they have, and they would either arrest you right away or maybe pick you up later, but only if it was a deportable offense.
This guy didn't have any offenses.
Oh, okay. And sometimes they do that too. If they get a tip and the guy's just removable, for instance, like he overstayed his visa, or they think they can cancel the visa if they think they have grounds to cancel it, then yeah, they would put him into deportation proceedings. They could hold him at a local county jail, like in Shelby, for a few days. Then they would move him to Helena, where they get processed for deportation. But then they would be shuffled ultimately down to Twin Falls, Idaho. And then they've got this airplane over there, and then they fly him to Tacoma, Washington. And then in Tacoma, Washington, they hold you in this federal facility that makes a ton of money holding immigrant detainees. And they make even more money because the judges there like to deny bond a whole lot. And so that is just a cash machine in Tacoma, Washington. And so that's kind of the route they take, and they wind up in deportation proceedings over there. It always changes. It's changed over the years, but that's how it is right now.
Speaking of the cash made because they denied bond, there was that Jennings decision out of the Supreme Court, which basically said there was a statutory authority to deny bond. So essentially, it's turned into indefinite detention. They kicked the constitutional question, but I'm not super hopeful when it comes back to the Supreme Court that they're going to go, you know what, it's really the wrong thing to do constitutionally given the makeup of the Supreme Court. So that's another piece of that to keep in mind.
Yeah, so I just want to say, Jordan, I really admire and respect the ethical decision that you made, and
Thank you.
And to thank you for that.
Yeah, that's very admirable.
Yeah. Courageous and heroic, even, just as this is a safe room, but still, it's not necessarily a safe state to make statements like you have done. So, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about what went into that, what the office environment was like, and what that environment is that you left behind that's still there, if you can?
No, it's mostly like a lot of people had sort of asked questions about was it hostile? It's like no, everyone sort of understood why I was doing it, and they were supportive in the sense that they were like, we totally understand. They wanted to make really sure that when I said I couldn't do this, that I understood what that meant. It was actually a little funny because I was talking with HR and they're like, you understand that if you quit, you will be ineligible for unemployment insurance benefits, which was really funny because I had been working there since 2012, working on unemployment insurance, cases coming through. So I was like, yes, I really understand that I will be ineligible because I am quitting. And I had sort of hoped that their support might have gone a little bit further, because they had offered me do you stick around? Maybe we can find you a different position in the department, or maybe wait till you find some other position. But at that point, because overall, I believed and still do believe in the overall mission of the Department of Labor. Make sure people are paid for the job they're doing. Make sure they have a workplace that's safe. Those are admirable goals. But when it came down to it, I realized no matter what job I was doing there, all of the work product I would be putting out would be subject to these subpoenas, so there's a little, trying not to get too much into the weeds on the technicality here, but essentially what they were asking for was an administrative subpoena, which is basically just Agency A says to Agency B, hi, I'd like this information. And they give them the information. So they're going off, they don't have to prove to anybody that there's a reason they want this information. Like Shahid was saying, they're sort of going around the process to do this. And so no matter where I worked in the department, I would still be feeding into this. And I was fairly certain that because I had not seen it come my way before I think they were basically just going straight to like whatever division, they were going straight to wage and hour, straight to unemployment insurance. And this was the fix, was to send it through legal, but they were still gonna do it anyway. And so no matter where I worked, I knew that whatever I did, it was just gonna be handed over to ICE, and I just couldn't stay there anymore.
What could they do differently at Department of Labor?
If it would be, ask for it to be a judicial subpoena. There's been other some municipalities, some states, people have been saying, you need to actually show that you have a reason to ask what you're asking for. And it's especially strange for a state like Montana. We're one of 10 states that have a right to privacy in our state constitution. Our right to privacy is higher than the national standard. And yet this information is just still being handed over for reasons I'm still trying to figure out. But thank you.
I just want to clarify some things, Shahid, that you said you could expand upon. You mentioned that Customs and Border Patrol is the other big agency in Montana that does immigration enforcement. And can you tell us a little bit more about what their parameters are? And because it's pretty wide, actually. They're not what I think of a lot like, oh, they hang out on the border, they watch people who cross, they check your documents. They're actually sort of a wider breadth of things that they can do. And then a little bit about that sort of definition of criminal or civil. I think a lot of times we hear the word illegal, and so maybe you could expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So first about Border Patrol and kind of what they can do. They have pretty wide, a wide breadth to engage in all kinds of law enforcement activities relating to immigration, and they are known to be one of the most aggressive law enforcement agencies of any kind. They are they know that there's often very little judicial review of the things they do, and they know that that means they can get away with more, and so they feel free to exercise that power and do it frequently. And so Border Patrol operates within 100 miles of the border. On occasions, there can be probably ways that they can operate beyond that, but that's where you would generally find them. And so there's a Havre Border Patrol station, there's one in Plentywood, and there could very well be one in between, but the Plentywood is near Sydney, so it's kind of on both ends. And those Border Patrol agents like to patrol Highway 2 between, that goes through to North Dakota. And they know that there's more traffic there lately, and a lot of them are Latino workers going to work in North Dakota. But Border Patrol has imagined that there is there's kind of like a lot of drug trafficking going on along there, and so they've felt free to pull people over and use local law enforcement as a means to pull people over for speeding, and then inquire into their immigration status. And in fact, Border Patrol stations have encouraged local law enforcement officers to help them by, if they find somebody that they find to be suspicious, to hold them and call Border Patrol. And that's what they did in this one client's case that I was just talking about. And in that case, I learned that Border Patrol's authority is so broad that they can even try to seize vehicles. And so basically they arrested the pregnant DACA recipient and her husband who had a valid visitor's visa based on wild speculation about smuggling, which made no sense, and they held them for 24 hours, and then later they seized their vehicle and said that the vehicle had been used in alien smuggling. And so I challenged that, and they gave the vehicle back because they had no grounds whatsoever to think that it was smuggling. And so they can make arrests whenever they want, and if you are somebody who, for instance, was arrested and held 24 hours without a legal basis, you can try to file a lawsuit against the federal government, and in a lot of cases, government officers have immunity for their actions that are taken in the course of their duties. And so there's often really no recourse, but technically you do have your Fourth Amendment rights and your Fifth Amendment rights when dealing with Border Patrol, and everybody has those rights, even non-citizens. So, oh yeah, and about it's a common misconception that immigration violations are criminal in nature, and that is partly why people use the term illegal alien. The other reason people use the term illegal alien is because it caught on, and because it was intended to be a dehumanizing term to refer to a person's whole being or existence as being illegal is a great way to dehumanize them and make you not care about them. The term itself does its job for you. And so that was the other reason. But illegal alien is a misnomer for a bunch of reasons, but in terms of legally, most immigration violations are civil in nature, not criminal. So when you overstay a visitor's visa, that's considered a civil violation of immigration law. And if you get put in deportation, those are civil deportation proceedings, not criminal. And it makes a difference whether it's civil or criminal in the law, and so it should make a difference in how we speak too. So there are only a couple of criminal immigration violations. One of them is illegally re-entering the country after you've been deported once. Another one is human smuggling, and another one is being caught in the act, literally caught in the act of entering the country illegally. And that crime is just a misdemeanor. So when you have local law enforcement officers going around pulling people over and asking about their immigration status, you have to question, do you think it was smuggling? Do you think they illegally re-entered after an order of removal and you have that probable cause right from the get-go to make that stop? Or you know, are you catching them in the act of entering the country illegally, which is pretty unlikely here? So those criminal violations don't factor in, and that's why local law enforcement officers shouldn't be enforcing immigration laws.
I have a question with, I don't know why this makes me think of like the war on drugs or something like that, because they're just pinpointing, I feel, like a lot of people of color. And, you know, we also have another country that's right next to us that's probably majority, you know, white. But in this case and scenario, do you know, like, maybe the racial representation of how many people are being detained that are people of color rather than people who are light-skinned or white?
I don't have like statistics about that, but I know from the people that I've represented, and a lot of the people who get detained ultimately do contact me. And I just did a docket. They moved our immigration court to Salt Lake City, so I just did one over there with 8 clients, and they were all people of color. All of them were. And then everybody who was arrested in the raids 2 weeks ago were all people of color. And pretty much every deportation case that I've been involved in the last several months have been people of color, actually. So.
But you know, Canada supply us with enough undocumented too. But you don't hear about that.
Yeah.
They supply us with a fair share, because when I work at immigration, most of them that were caught, the parents brought them almost like a DACA situation. The parents brought them across the border on their arms, and they just crossed the border, and then they lived here. And then this new law where you have to show your birth certificate to get your driver's license and all of that has captured quite a bit of that. Because when they find out, oh, my birth certificate is Canada, I've been undocumented all this time, but they've been working in state government, they've been working, and nobody bothered them. Nobody bothered to ask.
I've had a lot of people who come to me for the first time trying to figure out their immigration status because they're applying for Social Security. Right. And that's the first time they find out that they don't have any immigration status.
Yes.
And so, and then I've had to help people go through and dig through Freedom of Information Act requests to find out what the heck their mom did when they brought them in when they were 3 back in like 1942, you know? And so there are a lot of cases like that, and in a lot of cases there were, I guess maybe it's a product of that, but sometimes when there was a divorce in the family or maybe estrangement from both parents, their identity gets mixed up, and this is happening to U.S. citizens. It just or people who think they're U.S. citizens and may or may not be, depending on whether their parents got their naturalization while they were under a certain age, or any number of other factors, where they were born, and how long one of their parents lived in the U.S. before they were born. So there are all these little things that come into play, and sometimes I end up telling people, yeah, you are a U.S. citizen, go ahead and try to apply, and you should get your certificate. Or sometimes it's, like, oh, that's a bummer. If your mom had only done this when you were a kid, you would be, but you're out of luck. But at least in most of those cases where people are out of luck, they happen to be married to a U.S. citizen, and so they could go ahead and petition for a green card now, and so it wasn't as catastrophic as it could be. But then again, there's a 5-year waiting period for public benefits when you get a new green card. So
When I was in college in Kansas City, a friend of mine was Blackfoot, and he came in through the reservation or something like that, through his family, and he didn't even know he wasn't, something with Social Security or something like that. But from what I remember, he was able to finish, and he didn't have anybody question him after that. And I don't know where he went after that, but it's been years and years, 20 years ago or something like that, maybe more than that.
yeah.
I get to work on this with these folks with the Human Rights Network, but so often we know that primarily the immigration system is federal system and federal policy, but I'm really interested in knowing if any of the three of you have thoughts on how we may address issues at the state level. I know that we've defeated many policy propositions at the legislative level on immigration, and we've lost on initiatives. So where do you see the role for the state right now in the situation we're in currently?
I know when I was running my campaign for mayor, the one question that kept coming up was, are you going to make Helena a sanctuary city? And I always ask, the one question I would ask, what is your definition of a sanctuary city? And no lie, all the answers came back, allowing illegal immigrants to stay here legally. I'm like, what? That is not what sanctuary city is, and that's not what it's about. But getting that through to the general population, okay, you will talk to one or two people, and they may get it, they may not get it, or they think you're lying.
Mm-hmm.
But I always try to tell them, sanctuary city is not about undocumented immigrant. And then I always say, Montana does not have that problem. So I'm not going to preempt the problem to find a solution to it. What it is, really, is what Shahir was talking about. Don't get our law enforcement, regular police officers, don't get them involved in immigration issues. They're not trained as immigration officers. So they can't do that work. We already have the people doing that work. So do we have undocumented people flowing into Helena, Montana? No. So how is it possible that the mayor can make such a decision to make the city a sanctuary city? But I mean, the amount of misinformation out there is just astounding. And so on a 1 minute, when you were saying about on a state, the way I see this, until we have the problem, it's difficult to start looking for solutions. Because if you don't have the problem, don't reinvent the wheels.
But I think we do have the problem, and it's the over-aggressiveness. My family's all Hispanic, okay? When they come out, they were both born in Livingston. When they come out here, they say, "My God, Dad, this is the whitest state I've ever seen." And which is why they don't come here and immigrate here. Is why, And if my son was up there in Havre, who's also in the 101st Airborne, was talking Spanish, it would have been hand arrested. Yeah. So it is our problem today, And so that's following up is who do we pressure? You know, Kester, James, he's lost. You know, and somebody saying something to ICE, jack down, you know, because ultimately they are becoming much more aggressive than the
Yes.
local police, and they don't have it right. Because those people lost due process. When the
Yes.
kids go up there, they lose due process. I've traveled most of my life. I just came back 2 years ago. I grew up here. I've walked across ice in Juarez, Mexico with my daughter, and the Border Patrol got her in tears when she was about 5 years old saying, "Who's your parents?" You know, crap like that. They are rude and crude. I've traveled with friends across all borders from other countries. Got a friend from Pakistan, never crossed that border fast with him, you know. And these are professionals, you know.
Yeah.
And that xenophobia will hamper the economic growth of the state forever, because people will not come here.
I agree with you.
And
But to answer that question, you know, I think because ICE is federal, we may have to contact our federal representatives. Tester, Dean, and what's the other guy? I can't even remember.
Chief Forte.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, I don't think it's an easy thing to influence ICE right now in today's climate with all the with all the pressure they're getting all the way up from the top down, and with the head of the Department of Homeland Security being a personal pick with a heavily anti-immigration stance that's filtering down all the way through the Department of Homeland Security. So it's not an easy, there's no easy solution on this one, because it's become so institutionalized, and really a lot of these abuses are becoming really normalized too, which is troubling, because the more of these unlawful stops there are, the more it becomes just normal for that to become the status quo. And it's hard to challenge some of this stuff before, you know, in the legal system. If somebody gets put into deportation, you're hard pressed to challenge the basis of the initial arrest anymore, because they're actually just in deportation, and you can't suppress the body. They say under the law, they say that suppression of evidence doesn't include the physical presence of your body in the United States. And so in order for an arrest to actually be bad enough to where they would actually cancel your deportation, it has to be what the Ninth Circuit calls an especially egregious violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. And that they've defined that to basically mean when they barge in on your wife while she's naked in bed, that they're like, that's it, and no less than that. So
there was recently that one where I can't remember what state it was, but the woman at the door asked the ICE agent for a warrant, and he said, you know, you watch too much television. So would that count as the egregious, like just barging through the door when someone asks you for a warrant? Does that maybe meet that?
That could meet that. Yeah, if you just bust the door down, that could maybe satisfy the elements.
So when I saw that video of the pendejo up in Border Patrol there, I was so full of rage that if I would have seen an ICE van, I probably would have made the news. How do you handle that? How do you not just yell at people constantly? And for those of you, I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm normally very calm. I can put up with a lot of crap, but that just put me over the edge.
Yeah. Yeah, like you spend some of your time being mad that happened, but it happens so often that it's almost a useless emotion to be having. And then you start to focus that on trying to just help the families and give them what they need. And then half of what they end up needing is like emotional support for what they're going through, and the other half is just the legal side of it. And so, there's not even enough time to be angry about it anymore. You just, it's like you just move to the next person, try to help them the best they can. Then there's another one, then there's another one. And the numbers of deportations have increased so much that it's, it's kind of nuts. And so,
to go back to sort of the question about like what we might be able to do here, I think one of the things is start putting pressure on people in positions of authority, governor, tester, to come out and tell people, like, these are your rights. These are the rights you have, because like Shahid said, each time these rights are violated, it normalizes it. So we need someone with some pull to step up and say, if you're questioned, you know, this is what you do. This is what you say. This is what you can say. This is if they do something like this, you know, that's outside the bounds of the law. Until someone with the authority and the clout says that, stuff like this is going to continue. So start making phone calls.
Every little drop will help to fill that bucket, but we got to start from somewhere. And Jordan's right. We got to start making the noise. We can't just be silent and watch this go on and on and on. Even if you just make a call knowing that you know nothing will happen, make the call anyway. Because that call is better than no call.
And if you guys want to stay ahead of the game on what is coming down the pipeline, maybe you've already seen this, but it had become commonplace for the extreme right wing to just refer to almost all Muslims as being terrorists, and that was an effective way to just kind of cast like a whole group with like the idea that they're all bad. But now what we're seeing is that they're casting whole groups of Latinos as MS-13. It's basically the new way of calling somebody a terrorist when it's a Latino. They're MS-13 now, you know. And MS-13 is a very specific gang with very specific memberships, and it's a large gang, and it's a dangerous gang, and carelessly calling people members of MS-13 is extremely reckless, and nevertheless, that's kind of what's going on. And so it's easy right now, I mean, it's easy to demonize MS-13, and which is why the White House called them animals, because they're a horrible, dangerous gang. But the problem is, who are you calling an animal when you're lumping in this broad group of people without differentiating whether they have anything to do with organized crime or not? And so it's just a way to kind of cut out the actual meaning of the term MS-13 and just call everybody animals, basically. So,
well, and it was, recently there was ICE got slapped down by a judge for basically trying to fudge the evidence saying, oh, this guy's in a gang. It was like the judge said, no, he's not. So like this idea that, when President Trump, because people got upset and then a lot of people walked back, oh, he was just talking about MS-13, but it's like, if he's already calling every Latino MS-13 and then he's saying, oh, we're just calling MS-13 animals, it's not that much of a, stretch to start saying, well, they're all animals. So yeah, we need to watch out for that, because this stuff does get, the word normalized kind of got normalized. But like, this is how that sort of stuff starts. It's that little bit where, okay, well, they're a gang member, they're not a human. It's like, no, they're still human. Like, they might be not a great person, but they're still like a person. So then, because once you start calling their humanity into question, it's like, well, what about his brother? What about his cousin? What about his next door neighbor? What about somebody else who shares his, skin color? It's quite a slippery slope. Looks like you had,
I just had a question. I saw one situation where there was a little girl in the hospital and they called on her, and somehow that scenario transpired. My question, going back to that's egregious. At what point, I don't even know. I just, where can you get help, or where is the limit where you're invading privacy?
yeah.
I just want to say, right now, almost any and everything is possible. With what's going on within the immigration system, almost anything. As, like you said, you saw a little girl, she may have been 4, 3 years old. Yet still, they can start that process of deportation, because they getting to that little girl will lead to the parents, will lead to the uncles, will lead to the this and that. And so right now, this is the first time I can see that we don't have a system, we don't have a process. Nothing's working. They're doing their own thing.
Would any of you say that our Attorney General's office at this time is right for the kind of voice that you're advocating us to have? I'm thinking in political terms, but also practical terms, I think. Should we be pressuring the Attorney General to come out and articulate what our rights are?
Yeah, it's put pressure on him. I mean, the thing of it is that people get comfortable, and I think right now a lot of people doing this sort of stuff, they've gotten comfortable. They think that because everything is on fire right now, like, and so we're all kind of exhausted, and that makes it so that they don't have to try. They don't have to, step in and say, you know what, this has gone too far. Well, if we don't start putting that sort of pressure on people, like our Attorney General, like our governor, to come out and state in no uncertain terms, like, everyone has their everyone in the United States, doesn't matter what, you have certain rights. So the Attorney General would be, definitely a place to start.
Another, I was thinking about when the Confederate fountain came about, and the issues with that, but a local judge had made very public statements, and I know there were some other complaints filed with the Judicial Commission. I filed one of them, and I didn't think it was fair at all. Looking back at the history of the Judicial Commission, I don't think that there's ever been a minority or anybody on it. So, and I've questioned that for years, but I thought, because I questioned another judge previously, but I think that that's one area that probably needs to be addressed. And but as far as locally, and I think, when this Confederate fountain stuff comes up, and it comes up repeatedly, and there's probably another phase where it's going to come up again.
Oh, it's coming up already.
There's, it's a perfect time where, to really take a look at, I don't know, what we're message, or what we're not getting out there, or something like that. It's just, for me personally, it's a very scary time, because there's not a week that doesn't go by where somebody's asking me what country I came from. And I've been in a restaurant, and this was about 6 months ago, and I got yelled at, for not being a taxpayer. I can't remember now, but it was just this guy in a crowded restaurant here in Helena was just yelling at me. And the restaurant manager came out to offer to pay for my dinner, and I went ahead and paid for it myself, and I left. But nobody else in the room said a word. And that was really scary.
That's an instance where, like, us in this room, when stuff like that happens, like,
You gotta speak up.
here's the thing, like, it's scary. Like, acting is scary. Like, when I quit, I was scared out of my mind. Like, no joke. Like, I'm not trying to pretend like I just, like, was feeling like I was 6 foot tall and bulletproof. I was scared out of my mind. I was, casting my entire life into a whole different brand of chaos. But I did it anyway. Like, bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery is just doing it anyway. So I think, I'm really sorry that I wish more people would just step up, because a lot of people know this is wrong. They know it's wrong. It's, you can feel it, but there's this idea of, like, another one of the problems, this makes sense, I promise. So I took, when I was at the Department of Labor, I took CPR training I was part of the BEAT team, the Building Emergency Action Team. One of the things when you do CPR training is they tell you, okay, somebody falls on the ground, you check, make sure they're, did they just fall over? Are they, as soon as you realize what's going on, first thing you do, you point to somebody in the crowd and you say, call 911. The reason is, there's this thing called the bystander effect. The more people standing in a room, the less likely people are to act, because everyone's going, oh, I mean, there are 20 people in this room. Somebody's gonna do it, so I don't have to do it. It's like, no, you have to do it. Somebody else might not. So when we find ourselves in those situations, we have to step up. We can't just wait for somebody else. We can't wait for somebody else to do the thing. We have to do it.
I know Dave had a question for a while.
I would just comment that, much of what we've talked about tonight has been a vigilance and a reaction to the obvious injustice that occurs and the specifics of that. And we need to be vigilant and need to be focused on these. But I also wonder about proactive strategies where if we're going to talk about the refugee crisis, which is growing all over the country. I know some of the people from this church were recently in Brazil and ended up dealing with Venezuelan refugees that were pouring across the border, and heartbreaking. And we have teams from Helena right now on their way to Greece and other places where the refugee crisis is just growing and growing. And I guess I only want to raise the possibility that we as a community can figure out a way to begin to prepare ourselves to welcome one refugee family at a time. Something Missoula is doing with soft landings, and to develop those strategies, because it's not going to go away, and we can and will exhaust ourselves with these individual responses to injustice, and we have to. That's just part of who we are. We have to do these heroic individual things and stand up. But the larger strategy of how we begin to face the truth that this is a crisis that is growing and growing and growing. I have friends in the hollers up around Last Chance Gulch that are preparing. They're stockpiling guns. Okay, I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
Oh, I believe
That's their response to the fear of the refugee crisis that's growing. And it terrifies me that, well, no, it terrifies me. I just think we need to be at that point in our conversation as a community to begin to have a process by which the refugees and others can be welcomed into the community. And with Wilmot and Maddie and your experience, I think we have resources and narratives to support that process that a lot of communities don't have. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. And it's true. We do need to have a plan. I think one of the big problems right now is a lot of people are sort of sitting and waiting, kind of, because one of the things I've found since my story came out was there's people contact me like, I don't know what to do. I'd like to do something. I don't know what to do. I do think there's enough, there's quite a few of us here tonight, and no one has called for any of our heads up here, so I think the room's supportive. Quite a few people here obviously want to do something. So I think especially in a place like Montana where organizing people on the ground in Montana is difficult because we have a lot more ground than we do people. So there's this feeling of isolation, but we're not as isolated as we think. I mean, obviously, in a place like Helena, there's quite a few people interested in trying to find a way to help. So, I mean, it's, as you said, something more proactive. It's time to start figuring out what that looks like and trying to implement it. Even if it is just saying, we're not going to put up with this. That's part of the start, because no one's going to want to come here if there's this idea that the door is closed. And I think, at least in Helena, it feels like there's a lot of people who are.
We'll keep the door open.
I mean, I've been here about a decade now. My wife's from here, and it's a very welcoming community. So I mean, if we can, you were talking about the narrative, that's one of the areas where we tend to lose a lot on is the story. Because I mean, if you look at how Montana gets covered nationally, we don't tend to make the news for good stuff. It's so.
Hey, I made it news for good stuff.
Yes, you did. You did.
also get the news about crazy guys in
Yeah, I
cabins
know.
up in Lincoln, and
Yeah.
that stays on. Guys
That's-
don't talk about that.
I mean, when I asked a couple friends from back east, like, what's the last 2 news stories from Montana you remember? About 80% of them, at least one of the news stories they remember was like, oh, that guy body slamming the reporter.
Yeah.
And then, various after that.
Unabomber.
Unabomber, like, it's just, so, Montana has an image problem, shall we say. And I don't think it's deserved. Yes, we have some unpleasant individuals here, but we've got a lot of really great folk, and I think if more people were willing to at least step up and say, this is a good community.
But Sean, just to say, to echo what you were saying about the fountain, do you know that I've received letters blaming me for removing the fountain? I mean, literally, because they wrote me saying, you remove our fountain when you became mayor, and I'm thinking the fountain was removed in September. I became mayor January 2nd. I don't know how I did it, but
You're an amazing man, you time traveled.
but you see, and it's crazy though, because there's so many engines out there that can verify everything we do. But for us to still try to do what's not right is I don't know what to say. Because I mean, the guy that wrote the letter could have found out that it's not possible for this guy to have removed the fountain, but he didn't care. He still wanted to move forward with the misinformation. And I'm sure others that read it thought, oh yeah, this guy removed our fountain. No, I didn't remove any fountain.
I just want to add to that. I think I was there when you were on this panel in the Plymouth Congregational Church. When someone asked you what was your thought about this fountain. So it was part of your interview question. I'm not sure how you did it already when it was already an interview question for you.
Hey, truth doesn't matter.
Yeah, so as a high school student, I hear and see a lot of, I would say, interesting things on a day-to-day basis. A lot of those being racist, very right-wing sentiments that I'm assuming my peers got from their parents. How do I have a conversation with them about the issue of immigration? Like, have a peaceful conversation about it?
I always tell people, man, there's so much information out there. No amount of education is wasted. I remember when my son was in the 1st grade. What are you talking about? When my son was in the 1st grade, the teacher, now mind you, 1st grade, the teacher did an exercise and said, who's Republican and who's Democrat? 1st graders. And the class was almost divided 50-50. And she could tell the Republican parents and or the Democrat parents. She knew straight who were Republicans just by the kids. Because the kids, all the Republican kids went one place, all the Democrat. Do you really think they knew what they were doing? No, they were emulating their parents. And so, yeah, you're right. And so, but there's so much information out there. If you Google facts on immigration, boom, it will pop up. It will tell you exactly what you need. You go to USCIS website. There's so much information.
If I were you and they're talking about immigration, so let's say you hear somebody say something just like derogatory about Mexicans or something like that, or just kind of saying, let's deport all the immigrants, just who cares? The easiest way to get to a lot of people is just to kind of make them understand that these are just families. It's just about the right to live in the United States and pursue the same opportunities that everybody else has. I mean, it's about coming here and contributing to this country and becoming a part of it. And so with regard to undocumented immigration, one thing that I think helps to make people understand is, what would you do if it were your family? If you were in Mexico and you were in a situation where a drug cartel was trying to kill you and your family, what might you do in that situation? Just stay put because you don't want to cross this line in the border and violate U.S. immigration laws? One can pretend that that's what they would do, but in reality, when you actually stop and think about it, you know you would do whatever you needed to protect your family. And I think if people understand that and start empathizing a little bit with the plight of other people who are trying to protect their families, and maybe start trying to think about ways that they can do that lawfully and ways to expand and make the immigration system smarter and better, as opposed to just throwing out slurs or just acting like we can deport them all. That it's about trying to find the real solutions and not the talking points.
Yes,
I think
ma'am.
you also have to point, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it would not hurt at all, first find out from your family, if you don't already know, you probably do, when your own family came to America.
Oh, he
And
was
then
at
ask-
my naturalization hearing. So he's been through it.
Okay, so you know that, and so you can say to your friends, you can say, okay, my family came, it was this generation came from wherever your family came from, and ask them, do you know where your family came from? And get them to talk about it and say, these people, whoever it is that you're talking about at the moment, they have the same story we do, but it's happening about 50 years later, or it's happening 100 years later. But it's in no way different. It's people from another country that couldn't make it there because of famine or whatever, or war or whatever, and so they've had to go someplace better. And you just point out, this is us. These people are us. They're just, they came later on.
Each of us have our immigration story.
One of the things I come from a very diverse environment. Personally, my grandmother was Arabic and she was Muslim, and my grandfather was Jewish. They converted to Catholic. They were born in Morocco, migrated to Spain, and then my father was born. So I come from a very diverse, I'm from Costa Rica, but and then I lived 37 years in the Washington, D.C. area, where it was very mixed. I lived in Northern Virginia for 37 years. And one of the things that we used to tell people is treat others the way you want to be treated, with respect, with dignity. So that's what I used to say to a lot of people. Because even though I work in an international organization like the United Nations, it was in Washington, D.C., there were still people who were very racist and will say, the N-word, or, and it was like 65% Hispanic, but it was different countries, and some people were, I don't mean to be negative, but they were from Argentina, and then they thought that they were better than others, and they were British descent, or this or that, and the color of the skin, and blue eyes, and this and that. So I put them in their place. But I think that one of the ways that we, in this international organization with people from the Caribbean, people from different places in Latin America, different ethnicities, and everything, is that we have programs for how to deal with diversity. And this is something that is lacking here in Montana. I've been here 5 years, and it's been very hard. I almost got killed 3 times. Run over in the parking lot in Eureka, in the border with Canada. Another guy threw a trailer at me. I almost got killed by Bozeman. And another guy got mad at me in the movie theater. I thought he had a gun, so I didn't react, because if he had a gun, he would have killed me there. Because I was with some friends who were Afro descent. They happened to be Cuban, and she's darker and he's mulatto, and all these things happened because I was with them. In restaurants, all kinds of incidents have happened. So things start in school, where you learn in kindergarten. You got to start teaching the children here, expose them that it is okay to have an accent, it's okay to be Asian, Hispanic, Afro descent, and bring different people so they get exposed. You must have a program in the schools here, and also in the workplace, because it's becoming integrated. We are globalized, and we need to learn to deal with each other's accents, religions, different ways of thinking. And this is one thing that I think is lacking here. The children in kindergarten, they're small, they're not exposed. And I give you an example. My girlfriend, she left, she's in Florida now. And she's darker skin, and a child came and says, "Are you a gorilla?" You know, and it was like, whoa. Another child touched her in her face and said, "You have dirt in your face because you're not white." You know, so it's like lack of education. My son was in a diverse school in Northern Virginia, and some of the behavior that you have here that wasn't accepted in the schools or in the workplace or in public, the way things have happened here, is education. You know, you need to bring a program I know a person in my neighborhood here I live by the hospital, that she has programs online about diversity. So maybe a person like this can bring a change. She comes from New York. She can bring a change to Montana. You know, I can talk to her, but I don't know if there's funding. You know, maybe she can do some volunteer work. I'll talk to her. She's retired, and she can bring some of these programs to the schools or the high schools and say, this is normal. She teaches diversity online. So maybe we can talk to her, you know, and then people will see they're not educated. That's the problem that you're having.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
One of my so I'm with AmeriCorps, and one of my volunteer projects is called Read for Peace.
Mm-hmm.
And we did go into the elementary school, and we had to read the book about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King
Mm-hmm.
Jr., about the story about him growing up. And yeah, the students, they said, one of the kids, I still remember, said, you know, oh, well, you know, at that time all the African Americans and whites were separated. And he said, well, why doesn't that still happen today? Wouldn't they like to be on their own place and we can have our own?
Mm.
And a lot of the AmeriCorps, we talked about it afterwards of like, yeah, elementary school kids it's ingrained, you know, a lot of the kids just don't have any awareness. And if we don't have volunteer programs like this, you know, I don't know where they're gonna get the education, but you're right, you know, it needs to happen. There needs to be.
I'm going to talk to her and see if I think I might be successful. Yes. I don't promise, but I'll try to talk to her.
I'll just share two things, and then I'm guessing you're going to wrap up and some other questions.
Yeah, good.
So one, if you are interested in being in the loop around immigration issues, I just put a sign-up sheet on the table. Montana Human Rights Network, but happily share with Shahid and Miha and Jordan, who are doing good work. There is not a lot of money in Montana to do immigration work, which, you know, is just the nature of where we are. So the things that happen in this state on immigration are just because it matters and we care about it, and it's volunteers. There's just not going to be a lot of staffing of work on this issue. It's just one of the hard things about it. And then the other thing is that my lovely friend Ella is here, and the Human Rights Network is a multi-issue group, and we know that, you know, economic reasons for migration are a reason a lot of people move. And so economic justice is important to us as well, and we're working on the campaign to raise the tobacco tax to be able to continue the expansion of Medicaid and keep the nearly 100,000 people in Montana covered. So if you're interested in signing that for the initiative, you can do so right
On
there.
your way out.
Yeah.
Was there any, did you guys have any closing, anything you want to finish up with? No. I wanted to say thank you all very much for coming. And I want to thank the Montana Human Rights Network for helping co-sponsor, and Shahid and Mayor Wilma Collins here for coming to talk. And again, thank you to all of you for coming. And right now, we're on the edge of something. There's a chance we can, you know, maybe kind of turn this ship around if, you know, you rather talk to people. I mean, it's gonna be scary, it's gonna be difficult, but like a lot of people, you know, it is the education. People just don't know. They're told this narrative about immigration. They're told this narrative about people that does not resemble reality. You know, people are convinced, like, you know, we're being invaded. when you look at the numbers, it's not the case. And I mean, and also, like, we have, right now, you know, US birth rates are down. We need immigrants. We need them to do jobs that our population is aging out of the workforce. We're gonna need.
Some of us will not have Medicaid.
So if there's little actions you might want to take right now. So there's right now on the federal level, there's a proposal to screen visa applicants up to 5 years of their social media history. Now this seems, this is one of those sort of like it's not quite as sexy as some other topics, but it's right now, especially with the way our immigration system is set up. It's already an overburdened system. If you add this to it, it will pretty much grind everything to a halt. So if you search for it's a federal proposal, I'll make sure to try and post a link somewhere where everyone can find it. Its comment period runs out in 5 days. Tell your friends, like, it's a bad proposal. It's not gonna help us. It's just gonna slow everything down. And all the information they would essentially be looking for is stuff people are questions they've already been asked and answered under oath. So like it's not a great thing. It's a small action you can take right now to sort of maybe turn this ship around a little. But thank you all for coming, and hopefully we can keep doing the work. Thank you.